It happened during the reading of the will, which, I now realize, was already a ceremony of betrayal dressed in formality. The oak-paneled law office smelled of lemon polish and old carpet, the kind that made you feel like your every emotion was being watched. My sister, Lila, sat to my right, her expression carefully neutral, but her hands tapped a nervous rhythm on the armrest of her leather chair. She wore all black, not out of grief, I think, but for effect. Our parents had died in a car accident 3 weeks earlier, sudden and final, and this was the day the paperwork made their death real. Mr. Kessler, our parents' lawyer, adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began. The estate of Martin and Elise Donnelly. Assets including the primary residence in Amherst, the lake house in Montville, 3 investment accounts, and remaining cash, is to be divided as per the revised will, dated March 12th of this year. I leaned forward. March. That was just 2 months before the accident. Kessler continued. All assets are to be transferred in full to Lila Donnelly, with the understanding she will provide for her brother, Caleb Donnelly, as per mutual family agreement. It took me a moment. I actually smiled. I thought it was some mistake. I looked over at Lila, and she didn't look shocked, not even confused, just still. Still in that deliberate, knowing way I hadn't seen since we were kids, and she used to lie and say I broke the vase. Wait, I said, but Kessler kept reading. Per Clause 17, this supersedes all previous wills. And with the passing of both parties, this version becomes the enforceable directive of the estate. I felt the breath punch out of me. What the hell is this? Kessler finally looked up, clearly anticipating my question. Your parents made the changes privately. I verified their identity and signatures myself. Lila crossed one leg over the other and turned to me. It was their decision, Caleb. They didn't want to burden you with the responsibilities. You were struggling. Struggling. That word hit like spit in the face. I'd been laid off 6 months earlier, something Lila knew. And yes, I'd been working a temp job, but not because I was lazy. Because I refused to borrow money from my parents, like she always had. You talked them into this, I said, trying to stay calm. My voice still cracked. You visited them more in those last few months. You handled their appointments. You handled the accounts. Of course they trusted you. She tilted her head like I was being unreasonable. I love them. You were never around. I stood up. And now I get nothing? You get what they wanted for you, she said. And what you were too proud to ask for. She said it like it was mercy. Like she wasn't wiping out my inheritance, my future, our shared history, all with a single signature. Outside the office, I didn't say goodbye. I just walked down the stairs and into the street. The sky was overcast. It had rained earlier. The pavement was still wet, like the city had cried and moved on. I stood there in my suit, the same one I wore to both their funerals, and I felt small, powerless. Later that night, in my cramped apartment, I opened the file folder I'd brought from the meeting. Kessler had given me a courtesy copy of the estate documentation. Just proof, I suppose, of what I didn't have anymore. And tucked in the back was a single, handwritten note. I almost didn't see it at first, just a yellow legal pad sheet folded once and half crumpled. It was from my father. Caleb, we trust Lila to do what's right. You've always had a good heart. That will take you further than money ever could. Please stay close. You'll need each other after we're gone. I read it twice. Then I read it again. They didn't do this. Not willingly. I knew my sister. I knew how far she would go to look like the good one. The golden child with the answers. The one who played their emotions like a piano. She'd stolen everything. But I wasn't going to shout. Or beg. That night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, the fluorescent bulb buzzing in the hallway outside my door, and I made a vow. If Lila wanted to play keeper of the family name, I would make sure the truth she buried came crawling back up. Not with rage. Not with violence. With silence. And precision. The kind of revenge you don't see coming until it's already been filed, notarized, and processed. And by the time she realized, she'd have nothing left to call hers. Not the money. Not the house. Not even her name. The first week after the will reading, I said nothing. Not to Lila. Not to Kessler. Not to the extended family members who sent polite messages expressing their shock at the sudden loss and support for how the estate had been handled. I thanked them, played the part. Numb, quiet, functional. But underneath that performance, I was dissecting everything. I went back through the past year of communication with my parents. Every voicemail. Every email. I even looked at my old calendar invites, trying to find patterns, days when Lila visited them, doctor appointments she'd handled, errands she volunteered for. She'd taken over gradually. First, driving mom to her specialist appointments. Then helping dad with some banking stuff. It all looked helpful on the surface. But then I found something. An email from my dad, dated March 8th, just 4 days before the new will was signed. He'd sent it in the middle of the night. Subject, about the lake house. Lila wants us to sign some new paperwork. She says it'll simplify things. Not sure I understand it all. You around next week to take a look? I hadn't seen it before. It must have gotten buried under the pile of condolence messages after the accident. But there it was. He was unsure, and he was asking for help. I responded anyway. I'm here now. I called Kessler's office under the pretense of requesting copies of the full estate file. He agreed, reluctantly, said everything had been properly processed, signed, witnessed. He sounded distant, like he didn't want to talk, like maybe he felt something was off, too. Then came the second betrayal. 2 weeks after the reading, I got a notice from the county recorder's office. The Amherst property, our childhood home, had already been listed under Lila's name alone. She'd moved fast, transferred the title, consolidated accounts, closed my parents' joint safety deposit box. The lake house. Sold. Quietly, off-market, to a shell buyer under a corporate name. I traced it down through the county records. That was when I realized she hadn't just stolen the inheritance. She'd erased me from it. From everything. I drove out to Amherst that weekend. The front lawn was freshly landscaped. New flowers, new porch lights. A for sale sign stood casually by the mailbox, like it had always been there. I parked across the street, sat in my car, and stared at the windows. They were dark. Empty. This was the house where Dad used to read to us on the couch. Where Mom kept her recipe box, stained with flower fingerprints. Where we had birthdays, snow days, late-night kitchen talks. Now it was product. I drove away, hands tied on the wheel, and didn't stop until I reached the edge of town. There, I pulled into a gas station, sat in the lot, and let myself feel it. Not rage. Not yet. Just the sick burn of confirmation. She'd planned this. All of it. And then, as if fate wanted to be sure I got the message, my phone buzzed. It was a photo. From an unknown number. Lila. In front of the lake house. Champagne in one hand. Keys in the other. Laughing with some guy I didn't recognize. The caption read, "New beginnings." My mouth went dry. And still, I didn't respond. I didn't drive back and scream at her, or call her out on social media, or demand justice from a lawyer. I just stared at that photo, burned it into my mind. And then I opened a new browser tab and started researching property records, asset transfers, and guardianship responsibilities. I knew there were questions about Dad's mental sharpness in the last few months. Early signs of confusion, forgetfulness. Maybe Lila had helped him sign those documents when he didn't fully understand them. Maybe the witnesses weren't so neutral after all. Or maybe it was all technically legal, and still completely rotten. 3 days later, I called Mr. Kessler again. I asked for a meeting. When I arrived, he looked surprised. "Caleb, what can I do for you?" I sat down across from him, looked him square in the eyes. "I'm not here to contest the will," I said. "I'm here to understand it." He relaxed slightly, but I caught the flicker in his expression. I asked simple questions. When was the revision signed? Who were the witnesses? Was my father present mentally and physically? Were there assessments done? Why wasn't I notified? Kessler fumbled a bit. His tone shifted. Defensive. Your father was lucid. He and your mother both signed voluntarily. It was all above board. And the witnesses? He hesitated. Friends of your sister's. I believe one was a notary. I leaned forward. You believe? He adjusted his tie. It's not uncommon. I'd like the names. That's confidential. I stood up. Then this meeting's over. That night, I texted a friend of mine, a guy named Nolan who used to work in private equity and owed me a favor. He'd helped me once when I nearly lost my apartment. Smart guy. Knew how to follow paper trails. I told him I needed help tracing asset transfers and setting up a private LLC. Nothing shady. Just preparation. What's going on? He asked. My sister took everything, I said. And I'm going to take it back. The next morning, I got an alert. The Amherst property had just gone under contract. Buyer listed as Donnelly Heritage LLC, an entity Lila created, with my parents' money, using our last name. I laughed out loud in my kitchen. A dry, bitter laugh. She wanted to own the family legacy? She could have it. But I'd make sure she couldn't keep it. Not without everyone knowing exactly how she got it. Lila thought I was weak because I didn't fight her at the will reading. Because I wasn't loud. Because I walked away. But silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. And I had just reached the part of the story where strategy becomes action. I didn't need to prove my sister broke the law. I just needed to prove she broke trust. Publicly, cleanly, and in a way that couldn't be spun into a misunderstanding or mistake. Nolan was the key. The man had a quiet obsession with records. Everything left a footprint, he used to say. You just had to know where to look and how to press hard enough to make the imprint visible. We worked late nights at his apartment, poring over filings. The coffee table was a mess of county tax records, old utility bills, notarized contracts, and court filings. He traced the buyer of the lake house, which had been sold 2 weeks after the will reading, to a corporate entity that, upon inspection, had Lila listed as sole managing member. Technically, Nolan said, pointing to the filing, she didn't sell it. She sold it to herself. Using our parents' estate, I said flatly. Yeah. So she cashed it out, laundered it through an LLC, and now it's under her personal control. That's not just manipulative. That's surgical. We found more. She'd closed out my parents' charitable trust, the one they'd built after retiring, and moved the funds into what she called a legacy investment initiative. A high-risk speculative portfolio managed by a private wealth advisor she used to date. I confirmed it with a simple LinkedIn message under a fake name. The guy had no idea who he was bragging to. She said it was her money, he wrote. Parents left it all to her. No siblings. That stung more than I thought it would. Not just that she lied, but that she said I didn't even exist. I'd spent months after our parents died looking after the gravesite, calling the funeral director, handling the final medical bills that somehow never made it to her inbox. I paid for the headstone. I'd done it because I thought we were family. Turns out, I was just a name she needed to edit out of the picture. But I wasn't going to scream into the void. That would make me look bitter, unstable, the forgotten sibling trying to claw back relevance. Instead, I started writing. I built a clean, detailed narrative of everything. A digital dossier, really. It wasn't a blog, and it wasn't an expose. It was a simple timeline. Emails, screenshots, tax records, voicemails from my dad, financial transfers, corporate filings, a narrative with receipts. And I sent it quietly, one by one, to the people who mattered to her most. Her law school mentor, the one who helped her get her first position at the trust and estate firm in Boston. Her boyfriend's parents, both retired judges. A family friend on the board of the Donnelly Community Foundation. And finally, the Amherst Historical Society, where she'd just applied to become a board member, using the Donnelly name and, ironically, citing her dedication to family preservation. I included a letter with each packet. Nothing aggressive. No accusations. Just a calm note. I believe in transparency. I thought you should have the full picture before proceeding with any endorsement, affiliation, or public position related to Lila Donnelly. Nolan read the final version and gave a low whistle. You didn't burn her. You aired her laundry on a clothesline and left it out in the sun. A week later, I received my first response. A terse email from her mentor. Thank you for the materials. I've rescinded my reference. Then came the ripple effect. Her application to the Historical Society Board was tabled indefinitely. The community fund she'd applied to for a grant flagged her proposal for ethical review. I watched as the image she'd been building, the benevolent heir, the family legacy bearer, began to collapse. But I wasn't finished. I met with a probate lawyer, not to contest the will, but to petition for a formal inquiry into my father's mental state at the time of the revision. I'd gathered enough to raise legitimate questions. Medical records showed early cognitive decline. Texts suggested confusion. Kessler's own notes were vague. That petition wasn't a lawsuit. It was a legal red flag, and Lila knew it. Because the moment it was filed, I got a call from her. Caleb, she said, her voice tight. What are you doing? I was silent. This is insane. You're digging through our parents' lives like you're trying to prove something that isn't even. You want to drag their names through court? I'm not dragging anyone, I said calmly. I'm asking questions. Why now? You didn't just take money, Lila. You took identity. You took family. You edited me out. I didn't. You made sure I had nothing. And now I'm returning the favor. Silence. Then she snapped. You've always been jealous. Ever since we were kids. You just couldn't handle that they trusted me more. I almost laughed. Then you should have nothing to worry about. Trust wins everything, right? I hung up, and then I made my final move. Nolan helped me set up a nonprofit, the Donnelly Family Trust, restored. A name she couldn't use anymore. I opened it with the little savings I had left, just enough to make it real. Its purpose? To protect family legacies from financial exploitation, especially among elderly parents suffering cognitive decline. I used Dad's letter in the About section. That nonprofit made waves. Not because it was big, but because it struck a nerve. People in Amherst remembered my parents. They remembered me, too. Quiet Caleb, the steady one. The one who didn't show off. The one who'd stayed late after Dad's funeral to thank every single guest by name. And when local reporters picked up the story, first as a feel-good piece, then as something more layered, her name came up. Not because I included it, but because people started asking questions. That was the real weapon. Not the records. Not the LLCs. The questions. The shadows that form when someone turns on a light. I didn't plan for her to show up in person. It was a Tuesday morning, warm for late September. I was working out of the shared office space I'd rented downtown. Just a small desk in a converted brick building where I kept the nonprofit's operations going. The space was quiet, humming with the low murmur of freelancers and remote workers tapping at keyboards. I was deep in budget spreadsheets when I heard the door open behind me and someone say my name. Caleb. I turned around, and there she was. Lila. Hair pulled back into a clean twist, cream blazer, and an expression I hadn't seen on her face since we were kids, and she knocked over a vase and tried to convince our parents I did it. Calm, but only on the surface. There was a tremble in her jaw. She was losing control, and we both knew it. I stood. Slowly. You shouldn't be here. She looked around the room like she was checking for witnesses. Can we talk somewhere private? I nodded toward the small conference booth in the corner, a glass box meant for phone calls or one-on-one meetings. We walked there in silence. As the door clicked shut behind us, I could feel the weight of her presence pressing into the narrow space. I didn't come here to fight, she started. I came here to fix this. I leaned back in the chair. That's funny. I thought you already did. You fixed everything to work in your favor. Her mouth tightened. You've made your point. You've embarrassed me. You've cost me opportunities. The Historical Society withdrew my nomination. The community grant I was shortlisted for? Gone. And my firm is reviewing my position because someone, she paused, collecting herself, someone sent an anonymous packet to our ethics board. I didn't send anything anonymous, I said. I signed every envelope. She blinked. Why? What do you want from me? I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then I said, the truth. She laughed once, a short, bitter sound. You think any of this brings them back? You think this makes you the better sibling? No, I said quietly, but it makes me visible. You tried to erase me, Lila. Not just from the money, from the memory, from the family. I was trying to protect the estate, she snapped. You were broke, working temp jobs. You couldn't even keep your apartment. I cut her off. That was never your call. Her eyes flared. They told me to make sure things stayed stable. They trusted me with their accounts. Yeah. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder Nolan and I had compiled. Financial transfers, time-stamped emails, property records, and the March 8th message from Dad. Did they tell you to forge his initials on the Montville sale? To reroute the charitable trust into your boyfriend's brokerage firm? To lie about my existence to legal counsel and claim I was estranged? She didn't move. You want to talk about stability? I said. I was paying the hospice invoices you ignored. I was the one they called when Mom's prescription needed authorization and you didn't answer. You showed up when the money mattered, not when they needed you. Lila's voice dropped. You think you're some saint? You left. You ran off after college and barely called. I was building my own life, I said, and I came back when it counted. Can you say the same? She sat down suddenly, like her legs gave out. For the first time since the reading of the will, she looked human. Not polished, not composed. Just tired. I didn't think it would matter, she said finally. They were gone. I figured, what did it change? It changes everything, I said, because I remember who they were, and I know what they would have wanted. And it sure as hell wasn't this. She stared at the floor. So what happens now? I looked at her. Really looked. My sister. The same girl who used to cry when our cat went missing. Who taught me how to fake Dad's signature on school absence notes. Who held my hand when I had my first panic attack in college. There was still a piece of her in there. But it wasn't enough. You're going to sign the house back to the trust, I said. You're going to restore what's left of the estate to a neutral fund, one that honors our parents. Not you. Not me. And if I don't, I stood up and leaned forward, voice calm. Then I file a formal fraud complaint. I bring the medical reports, the witness affidavits, the recordings. You won't just lose the money, Lila. You'll lose your license, your job, your name. I pulled open the door to the booth, letting in the sound of keyboards and muted chatter from the main room. You have 3 days. I won't call you again. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Let her sit in that glass box and watch the life she built on a lie begin to shrink. I didn't need to scream or destroy her. I just needed her to feel the floor shift beneath her feet and know it was me who moved it. 3 days came and went without a word. No calls, no emails, nothing from Lila. I thought she'd resist until the bitter end. Thought she'd call my bluff, file an injunction, maybe twist the narrative one more time and spin herself as the victim. That's what people like her do when the walls close in. They turn into smoke, slip through cracks, play on sympathy. But then, just after midnight on the 3rd day, an email arrived. Subject line, it's done. 2 lines. That was all. Transfer documents are signed and submitted. The trust is funded. Congratulations, Caleb, you win. I stared at the screen, unmoving. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. I clicked the attached files. There they were, notarized forms, account closure confirmations, property reassignments. Everything exactly as I'd asked. No tricks, no conditions. Just a quiet, final surrender. I didn't reply. Not then. Instead, I sat back in my chair and let the silence settle around me like dust. All the motion, the anger, the late nights, the strategy, it had all led here. To the absence. To the stillness of something no longer being taken from me. The trust was renamed officially the next morning, the Donnelly Family Legacy Fund. Independent, transparent, managed by a third party. A portion of the funds went toward hospice care grants. Another portion toward small college scholarships for students who'd lost a parent. The remainder would remain untouched, growing, steady, silent. Just like the people it was meant to honor. I didn't make an announcement. Didn't post about it online. But word got around, quietly, as it always does in towns like Amherst. People began to see the name differently. Not as Lila's brand. Not as a footnote in probate court. But as something real again. Something with weight. She lost her nomination on the State Bar Ethics Committee. Her firm moved her out of client work, pending internal reassessment, which was code for, you're done, but we'll let you say you left. Eventually, she did. No press. No goodbye. I heard from a friend that she moved to upstate New York. Small town, new job, some quiet tax mediation firm with no website. She'd become a ghost with a resume. Exactly what she made of me once. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt, still. Because revenge, real revenge, doesn't end with fireworks. It ends with quiet. With someone looking around and realizing they have no ground left to stand on. And that the person they thought was beneath them was the one who set the ground on fire. I saw her once, months later. I was leaving a coffee shop near the courthouse, heading to a board meeting for the fund. She was across the street. Same walk, same posture, but slower. She looked up, caught my eye, stopped. We just stared at each other. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. And she didn't wave. Just 2 people who shared blood, who had buried the same parents, and who had buried something else between them. Something you can't exhume. Not even if you wanted to. Later that night, I got a text from Nolan. You good? I typed back. Better than she'll ever be. Then I put the phone down, stepped out onto my small balcony, and watched the evening settle in. There's a strange peace in knowing you didn't just win. You outlasted. And in the quiet aftermath of everything, I could finally hear my father's voice again. The one from his letter, the one that had haunted me. You've always had a good heart. That will take you further than money ever could. He was right, but he'd left one thing out. A good heart doesn't mean a soft one.